Welcome to the NCW Magazine. I'm Caitlin Hedersheet. On this episode, we're tagging along with Wenatchee Police Officer Albert Gonzalez on his Saturday night shift.
I've got eyes on him.
For the first time since 2012, drivers under the influence of alcohol and one or more other drugs, also known as polydrug drivers, have become the most common type of impaired driver involved in fatal crashes in Washington state. According to a 2018 Washington Traffic Safety Commission report, by 2016, the number of these drivers was more than double the number of alcohol-only drivers. Throughout his night shift, Wenatchee Police Officer Albert Gonzalez is working to spot impaired motorists within the city of Wenatchee. With more than 50 DUI arrests in 2018, Gonzalez is leading the charge for getting dangerous drivers out from behind the wheel.
If I'm looking to get DUIs, I'm probably going to be right here, where there's a bar on every block, and I'm probably going to be just making sure that everything's good here and that there's no major egregious traffic violations going on. You would be surprised how many times I'm just driving through here, minding my own business, not even looking for one, and a car runs a red light right in front of me, or dang near causes a collision right in front of me, or I've had before where cars almost hit me, and it ends up being a DUI. There's a little bit of luck, if you want to call it luck. I go out and I stop cars, like I said, and 90% of them are warnings, and it's just like, hey, just stay off your phone or slow down a little bit, and then on to the next. But you stop enough cars, eventually you're going to run across a DUI. You see that? My guy was driving in the oncoming lane, and he just made a lane change in the intersection. What the heck, man?
Motorists can call Rivercom to report drivers they believe are impaired, giving police their location and observed behavior. More often than not, they turn out to be distracted drivers, but Officer Gonzalez says sometimes they turn out to be a DUI.
It is occasional when people call it in, and sure enough, it is a DUI. Last night we had one.
44-year status.
It was an obvious, blatant DUI. The lady was driving on North Wenatchee Avenue by Leonard Evans in the oncoming lane. And her car was actually coasting. She was asleep in the car, and the car was going like 5 miles an hour in the oncoming lane. She was head back like this. Tell me that's not dangerous, right?
While responding to calls the night of our ride-along, Officer Gonzalez got a tip on a suspected impaired driver.
Car driving all over the roadway, just left the liquor store, no lights on. Yeah, that's a good stop. It's just that we have to be able to articulate our reason for the stop when this goes to court. So what'll happen is, if I get behind him right now, when he pulls out of the drive-thru there, as he's doing now, he pulls out of the drive-thru and he drives perfect. Now I need to make a determination whether or not I stop him. And based on what I have, I'm still going to stop him. I'm just going to try to build my own probable cause by my own observations. And in my report, I'm going to say, I was given this information beforehand, however, I got behind the car and I also observed this. Or maybe I didn't observe anything, but I still decided to pull him over based off of somebody else's observations. Just like he didn't use a blinker right now when he turned. So he's kind of in and out. It's not a blatant lane violation, but if he does it enough times, it does become one. The fact that there's a lot of traffic on the roadway, coupled with the other violations that he's not using his turn signal properly, kind of just meandering around. And everything that we're seeing right now, I'm making mental notes. 1K25. Because when it goes to writing my report, it's all going to get articulated in the report. What happened? What did I see? What did he do? Based on my training and experience, what do I believe is going on? And all of that. So that when the attorneys get it, when the prosecutor gets it, they can say, okay, first of all, there was a good reason for the stop. Second of all, when the officer contacts the driver, what do you see? You articulate that.
Officers are looking for clues to help them determine when a driver may be impaired. Gonzalez says there is one clue he looks for first when approaching a vehicle.
Odor for intoxicants, for alcohol. Also, how he pulls over is my one thing. I have to put my spotlight on the car to see what they're doing in the car before I get out. A lot of times they'll be reaching under the seat. We don't know what they have.
When approaching a driver, Officer Gonzalez says he focuses on their behavior along with answers to basic questions while also running a check on the driver's record.
Hey, how you doing, man?
Pretty good, how are you?
Good. It's a nice ride, man. 2013, 335. This got the twin turbos in it. It's pretty fast, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
There's that back for you. All right, man, like I said, just checking on you, making sure you're good. So have a
For
good night,
officers looking for impaired drivers, it's just as important to determine if a driver is sober as it is to determine impairment.
right? I was advising him.
For this traffic stop, Gonzalez says after looking for clues and talking with the driver, he was able to make a sound determination.
So there you go. Case in point. Not impaired. I think he was just messing around in the car or something. He says that this car is new to him. He has never driven it before. It's his mother-in-law's. So that could be.
According to Gonzalez, there is no typical impaired driver, as he stopped anyone from teenagers, teachers, attorneys, and doctors, even a police chief from another state. Regardless of their status, impaired drivers often feel a DUI charge brings life as they know it to a halt.
People think it's like a life-ending arrest. And it could be, I don't know. I've never had a DUI, obviously. But, I mean, it could be for a person. Shoot, I know that if me as an officer, I got a DUI off duty, yeah, that would probably be like a life-ending moment for me. That's my career. So I understand why DUIs are nitpicked and heavily scrutinized. And everything that's done in the DUI is looked at with a fine-tooth comb.
Officer Gonzalez says in addition to more meth and heroin on the streets, he has seen more DUI arrests involving marijuana with younger drivers.
We've been seeing more marijuana DUIs. Similar to alcohol, but it's a little different for marijuana. Obviously, you can probably smell the odor of marijuana. You might have slow, uncoordinated, maybe even green film on their tongue when you check their mouth. Typically, not always, but typically, we see the younger kids that they can get their hands on marijuana, they smoke, they think they're fine, they go drive, and we're like, dude, you're not fine. And all these indicators tell us otherwise. You're under arrest, and then that's kind of just blanket statement. Most younger kids are more than likely going to be marijuana. There is adults that get arrested for marijuana, but not that often. And then we have our crowd that we know that are sometimes drug users, and that we know them as, that constantly going to drug houses and that we deal with all the time. And if they're driving, they might be under the influence of the drug of their choice. Whether it be meth, heroin. We do see quite a bit of meth. There's more meth. I would say that we see more meth than we do heroin, but heroin is making a strong comeback.
As our ride-along continued that Saturday night, Officer Gonzalez was able to make contact with several impaired motorists, including his very first felony DUI arrest. Stay tuned to the NCW Magazine as we'll continue our conversation on the road and take a look at what a DUI arrest looks like with the Wenatchee Police Department. Welcome back to the NCW Magazine. I'm Caitlin Hedersheet. As we continue our ride-along with Wenatchee Police Officer Albert Gonzalez, an officer on the leaderboard for the most DUI arrests in 2018, I asked him what he's on the lookout for as his Saturday night progresses.
About 10 o'clock, the bars start ramping up, and so this is kind of the time when we start seeing the people that have been pre-funking that go out and they go driving, and then they get stopped and they get DUIs before they get to the bar. And then there's there's the anomalies that leave early, but then you'll get the majority that leave out at like 1:30, and then you start seeing the DUIs, and most DUIs are going to be very evident at that time because they're higher up on the level on the BAC. So you'll see all the classic stuff like swerving and not stopping at lights, and it's pretty obvious when you start looking for it.
With 5 years as a police officer under his belt, 2 of which with the Wenatchee Police Department, Officer Gonzalez has received attention from his work, including a 2016 viral video of him performing CPR on an unconscious man, assisting in a similar incident involving an unconscious man on 5th and Western a year later, and most recently, an investigation confirmed Officer Gonzalez's actions were justified in an officer-involved shooting that killed a Wenatchee man in July of 2017. Many moments on the job as a police officer are unknown and unexpected, something Officer Gonzalez says his experience so far has confirmed. No matter the circumstances, Gonzalez says he does the job with hopes to make a difference.
I want to be able to go and do the best job that I can to try to prevent crimes from occurring, if and when possible. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff that you'll never be able to know that's going to happen. But with the drugs and DUIs, that's one thing that you know for certain. You're affecting something right then and there by making that arrest. With the DUIs, you know that sooner or later, statistically, this person's going to probably hurt himself or hurt somebody else through driving under the influence. You're disrupting that by taking them off the road right then and there. You just made a difference. You'll never know how, but you did. And I like being able to speak to people from all walks of life. It makes it for an interesting day.
While talking with Gonzalez about how often he stumbles upon an obvious case of DUI, a man drives into the oncoming lane right in front of us. After pulling the vehicle over into a parking lot, Officer Gonzalez began contact with the driver.
How much have you had to drink tonight?
The driver admits to having a few beers at a holiday party. Smelling a strong odor of alcohol in the car, he asks the driver to step out of the vehicle for voluntary field sobriety tests.
Your wife looks like she's had a few drinks as well. It might be from her. But then coupled with your driving, I just want to make sure you're good to drive before I let you go from here.
After the driver opted out of the preliminary breath test, or PBT, Officer Gonzalez felt he had enough evidence to arrest the driver.
I'm seeing enough of impairment on you. You're under arrest for DUI, okay? Put your hands behind your back for me, please. All right, we're going to go back here. I'll explain everything to you, okay? And we'll go do some of the...
In Washington State, when arrested for a DUI, the vehicle is required to be towed and held for 12 hours.
You'll be able to bail out within the hour, okay? So I just need to put this away.
Once arriving at the jail and checking the driver's record, Officer Gonzalez discovered something he hasn't seen in his career before.
Okay. All right, we're going to go ahead and head on in. This is a felony arrest. He doesn't know that yet.
In Washington State, any driver previously convicted of a vehicular assault involving a DUI makes any DUI after that incident a felony. Once inside the jail, officers begin their DUI arrest packet, which is standardized for Washington State. From a mouth check to a questionnaire, officers read and explain constitutional rights and Washington State laws while working through the process. Following a 15-minute observation period, Officer Gonzalez was ready to conduct the breath test with what's called the Draeger instrument.
That's about as, I wouldn't call it textbook, I'd say typical as far as the DUI process would go, but there's a lot of different things that could have happened that could have changed the process a little bit. You know, if he requested an attorney, then I would have got him in touch with an attorney. If he said he didn't want to blow and said I refuse, then I would have gone the search warrant route, would have wrote a search warrant for his blood. Yeah, and so the search warrant process is a little more involved. I'd have to go back to the police department, type up a probable cause statement and attach it to a search warrant affidavit, email that to the judge. The judge reviews it, sends it back. If it's approved, then I take that, I contact Ballard ambulance shows up, they conduct a blood draw. Take the blood, book it in evidence, then that gets sent off to the WSP toxicology lab for review or for analysis.
The driver booked that night was not eligible for bail because of the felony DUI, putting him in jail until he could get in front of a judge Monday morning. Even inside the jail, the breath or blood tests are voluntary and require a search warrant for officers to perform if the driver refuses. In Washington State, this refusal can be used against the driver in the courtroom. Officer Gonzalez said for this man, the incident could have been much worse.
Yeah, he is lucky there was no cars coming. If there would have been any cars coming, I mean, who knows what could have happened. I mean, it could have been obviously probably a head-on collision. I don't know, the speed's 30, 35, probably enough to cause an injury. I don't know about death, but injury for sure. Passenger probably would have been injured. And, you know, who knows who's on the road at that time. It wasn't very late. It was 10:40 something p.m. when I did the traffic stop. So, I mean, that's still a reasonable hour to expect families on the roadway, especially during this time of the year.
It happens so quickly. Like,
I told you, it happens right in front of you all the time. It's just you have to know what you're looking for. I mean, that one was pretty obvious.
Surprisingly enough, that was not the most egregious incident involving an impaired driver on the road that night. Stay tuned to the NCW Magazine as we bring you more from our ride-along with Wenatchee Police Officer Albert Gonzalez. Welcome back to the NCW Magazine. I'm Caitlin Hedersheet. Driver impairment due to alcohol and drugs is the #1 contributing factor in fatal crashes in Washington state and is involved in nearly half of all traffic fatalities. This, according to a 2018 traffic safety report. Another major contributing factor to vehicle fatalities in Washington state is speeding, which accounts for 31% of all crash fatalities between 2007 and 2016. While on a DUI ride along with Wenatchee Police Officer Albert Gonzalez, we saw an example of an impaired driver speeding and failing to yield.
Come on, there's plenty of places to pull over. You gotta be kidding me.
After pursuing the vehicle into East Wenatchee and eventually coming to a stop at a 7-Eleven, officers asked the driver to step out of the vehicle.
What is your issue? Driver, put your hands out the window. Driver, put your hands out the window.
Explaining to police why she failed to stop for Officer Gonzalez, the driver submitted to the preliminary breath test after admitting she had been drinking. Gonzalez places her under arrest for driving under the influence and speeding.
Okay, look, I'm not charging you with the felony, okay? I'm not charging you with the felony. This is simply you failed to yield to my lights and sirens, and obviously you're under the influence. Okay.
Any driver arrested for driving under the influence in Wenatchee is taken to the Chelan County Jail. In this case, the impaired driver began to refuse to cooperate with Officer Gonzalez, but volunteered for a blood test. After following protocol for a blood draw, the female driver was booked in jail for a DUI. Officer Gonzalez says sometimes he can't help but wonder how each case ends for his arrests.
I'm not supposed to get emotionally invested in cases, but sometimes you do, and then or you do a lot of legwork, or you work on it for a long time, and it's something that it becomes your baby, and then you want to know what the outcome is, and then sometimes you're disappointed. So then you're like, I'd rather not know anymore. So that happens a lot with DUIs.
When it comes to DUIs, I ask Gonzalez if he's ever sympathetic toward a person and their story, as it could be the worst day of someone's life.
It's all about how you talk to people and how you come across. I always tell people that exact thing, and a lot of officers do too. When we arrest somebody, it is the worst day of their lives. It doesn't matter what the charge is. They're going to jail, so they're not going to be happy about it. Some people know that it's coming. Some people don't care. Others freak out. But ultimately, what it comes down to is I just break it down and I say, hey, look, it's not a felony, first of all, and unless they have more than 4 in 10 years, then it is a felony, but that's another story. Your license being suspended is not guaranteed, and it's all factual. A lot of people from all walks of life we see that get DUIs. I mean, professionals, your average Joe, your hardened criminal, everybody. It's kind of a sad deal, but I think a lot of it comes down to people feel that they are fine and they're not.
More often than not, DUIs are a preventable crime. Officers often warn the community, just don't drink and drive.
That's what I say. It's always safe, just don't drive and just get an Uber.
Officer Gonzalez says there are cases where drivers are exhibiting dangerous behavior, but it's not always impairment.
Something that we got to be cognizant of too is medical emergencies that might seem like impairment, but aren't.
Drivers experiencing a diabetic episode, stroke, a crisis or mental health condition, or even a traumatic brain injury. These are all instances where a driver could be misidentified as impaired. Gonzalez says this is where interview questions and the field sobriety test can help determine the situation, or calling in a drug recognition expert.
If all else fails, then a DRE can be called out, a drug recognition expert, to conduct some additional testing.
Also known as a DRE, the purpose for this program is to further help officers determine whether a driver is under the influence and what drug is causing the impairment.
So I'm a DRE, so I do a lot of DUIs.
DREs complete several weeks of training and follow a 12-step procedure when investigating a possible DUI and are required to maintain their certification every 2 years. In our next NCW Magazine, we sit down with Wenatchee detective Steve Evett to take a closer look at the field sobriety tests and talk more about DREs. Visit ncwlife.com to watch this episode and view other NCW magazines on demand.